All right, I think I'm live. This is day 3 of our 5-day blood sugar challenge. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope y'all are having a great week and are having fun hanging out with us. I know we're having a lot of fun hanging out with you all. Yeah, this is day 3 of our 5-day blood sugar challenge. I would love to hear from those of you who are with me right now, joining live. Hello, Claudia, Jana. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm on Pacific time, so it's 9 a.m. my time. Good morning, Lisa, David, Debbie, Karen. Hi, guys. Sarah, Peggy, Stephen. Okay, good. Elaine, Tony. Hi, Greg, Paula. We got a timely bunch here. You guys are all right on time. Patricia, awesome. Hi, Terry, Donna, Kelly, Monique, Peaches, Janice, Joni, Jeff, Terry, Namisha. That's a really cool name, Namisha. Hi, everybody. Another Kelly, Nevelyn, Tammy. Hi, Katrina, Chris, Regina, Gemma, Marcella. Hi, Pam, Sue, Rhonda, Melinda, Millie. Awesome, awesome. Lori. Hi, everybody. I would love to hear you guys. We have really enjoyed seeing everybody submitting their numbers for day 2. Isn't it pretty cool to see that you guys were able to get your blood sugar down in basically 24 hours? So when you really compared what you ate on day 1 being the standard advice your dietitian or doctor gave you or the American Diabetes Association and compared it to what we shared with you yesterday in the day 2 training, what to eat, wasn't it pretty cool to see how much of a difference there was in your blood sugar readings? So you guys go ahead and share some numbers with me in the chat. Our goal yesterday for day 2 and for the rest of this challenge is to eat at least one meal a day. If you're for the overachievers, you're welcome to do this as often as possible and you will reap even better results if you do that. But the goal for day 2 through day 5 of this challenge is just to test one meal a day and stay within a 30-point threshold for that one meal. So you guys drop some numbers in the chat. I see numbers rolling in. Those of you who were able to successfully stay within that 30-point threshold, I'm seeing lots of numbers. I also know, so again, just as a reminder, we are not, we're taking your before and after numbers out of the equation. We don't need to know what your blood sugar was before your meal or after your meal. We just want to know the difference. So did it go up 10 points? Did it go up 8 points? Did it go down after you ate? I'm seeing some people saying their blood sugar, you guys might have a negative number, like Sandra had a -8. So yeah, our goal yesterday was to have less than a 30-point increase. And if you did that, you should give yourself a big pat on the back. We are very, very proud of you. That is how you balance your blood sugar. And that is how, if you stick with this, regardless of if your blood sugar is in the 200s, the 300s, or even the low 100s, you do that consistently over time, your blood sugar and A1C, all of your numbers will continue to drop. And that's how you put diabetes in remission. And I'm also really excited for today and tomorrow's trainings because we're going to really dive into the science behind insulin and insulin resistance. So you guys are going to have a really good understanding of what's actually going on in your body as we make these changes. You're going to have a good understanding of not only, what got you here to begin with, right? Why you developed insulin resistance and your A1C climbed up and your blood sugar climbed up. You're going to understand what got you here to begin with, but also you're going to understand exactly what to do about it, which is really, really exciting and empowering. Yeah, you guys, I love this. So many of you guys, like practically everybody. And I saw one person said they had like a 31-point increase. So also remember, and you guys did a really good job of this, but remember that if your blood sugar spikes more than 30 points, it's one of two things. Either you ate something that spiked you, right? You didn't, and that usually happens if you didn't quite follow the guidelines I gave you yesterday. So I know somebody said, they ate what would be a compliant meal, but they included carrots. And she goes, maybe the carrots did it. And it was just a little over 30. And so I'm thinking, yeah, maybe the carrots did it because they were not on the list because they're a little higher in carbs. Or if you didn't include fat. So for example, the same person, the other suspicion I had was, she followed the guidelines. She had chicken breast with some low carb vegetables, except she included carrots, but I don't know if she used any fat. And I'm thinking, Well, I bet you if she used chicken thighs, skin on, there's some fat there. That would have helped buffer the impact of those carbohydrates. So just remember, protein and fat act like buffers, and if you don't have enough protein and fat, then you're going to see a bigger spike. Actually, while we're hanging out, we'll hang out just another minute or two. I'll keep talking. But for example, I had an old client of mine, awesome guy named Steve, super motivated, and he did this 5 day challenge with me many moons ago. And he was kind of going more plant based because that's what he had been told to do. And then he did the 5 day challenge, was like, oh, well, I love meat anyways, but like, I was just confused about what I should be doing. So he ended up signing on to work with me for another 3 months. And when our first week together, he said, I don't get it. I did the before and after testing and I thought I was following the guidelines from the challenge, but my blood sugar shot up over 100 points. And he said, what I ate was a really beautiful soup that my wife made from scratch, really healthy soup. And I go, okay, that's interesting. And I go, were there potatoes or rice or barley or anything in it? And he goes, no, it was just, it was all healthy. It was all fine. No grains, no nothing like that. So we're digging and I'm going, I don't know, Steve. I go, was there meat in it? And he goes, no, it was a vegetarian soup. I go, that's the issue. So while he ate a meal that was compliant in the sense that it had all the low carb vegetables that were approved, it didn't have any protein and fat to really buffer the impact that those carbs would have on his blood sugar. So he saw his blood sugar spike 100 points. I said it would have been a different story if you had one or two pieces of chicken or a burger patty, or if you would put some meat into the soup. So it's all part of the learning experience. Nobody in here is in trouble for testing things. You guys are absolutely allowed to test whatever you want, but I will tell you there's two culprits. When you see your blood sugar spike more than 30 points, it's either the meal had too many carbs, or I should say there's three culprits. The meal didn't had too many carbs, right? So it's your job to kind of like take a look or mentally take a look at what you ate and figure out what that culprit would be. Or you didn't have enough protein and fat to buffer the little bit of carbs that you had. Or the third thing, meter error. Remember, these glucose meters have a 15% margin of error. So they're not perfect. They're not 100% accurate. Every once in a while, when you guys will share, hey, my blood sugar went up 35 points. I ate super compliant. Then what we're going to say is, hey, let's chalk that up to a meter error. It probably was more like a 28-point increase, and your meter spit out 33 or 38. So all right. All right, welcome everybody. I think that we're 7 minutes after the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and dive into our day 3 training. I'm really just, it makes me so happy to see how many of you guys are able to get such good results so quickly. That's why I absolutely love this 5-day blood sugar challenge. Today we're going to talk about insulin. I'm going to cover some basics about insulin because a lot of people, when they hear the word insulin, they think about insulin injections. And that's one source of insulin, but insulin's also made naturally by our body, and we have to understand, honestly, we have to understand how insulin works to reverse insulin resistance. Once we understand how this little hormone works, we've cracked the diabetes code. We've cracked the weight loss code. We've cracked the high blood pressure code. Like there are so many things that insulin influences, and when we understand how it works, we can get really powerful results. So let's go ahead and dive into our day 3 training. So kind of just to piggyback off of what I just said, insulin can be your greatest weapon or your worst enemy. And you guys are going to understand that, what I mean by that, by the end of today's training. Unfortunately, most of you guys got here because you didn't know this, you didn't have this information, right? And you were using insulin to your disadvantage. And over time, you've been abusing insulin to the point where you've developed insulin resistance. Now, this is nobody's fault. We could go back to the history we talked about on day 1, which is all those myths and misconceptions that we've been led to believe, the mainstream guidelines people have been taught, the food pyramid, like all these things that have done us a massive disservice. But just knowing that insulin can be your greatest weapon, which is what we're teaching you to do this week, or it can be your worst enemy. I hope also that between day 1 and day 2 of the challenge, comparing the two different approaches, you learned that you don't actually need to eat less food. You don't need to watch your calories. You don't need to watch your portion sizes. So you don't need to eat less food. You just need to eat the right foods. So, what we really, really want you to do today, yesterday, and every day moving forward is we want to prove to you, again, don't trust us blindly. You're using your blood meter or your CGM to determine this for yourself. But we want to show you and prove to you that you can eat a nice, big, satiating meal that doesn't spike your blood sugar. I mean, how many of you guys, almost everybody here, stayed within that 30-point threshold? That's beautiful. And some of you guys saw basically no increase in your blood sugar, like it stayed the same or it only went up like 8 points or 5 points. That's not significant. That's basically nothing. Some of you guys actually saw your blood sugar go down. So this is proof, and I understand we've only tested one meal so far for day 2, but we're going to continue doing this moving forward this week. And you guys can take these skills and continue using them, this information, for the rest of your life. So this is just proof firsthand. You guys are seeing that you don't need to eat less food. You just need to eat the right foods. And it really came back to the 3 macronutrients. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, the graph of the 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrates, and how they each impact our blood sugar differently. Carbohydrates raise our blood sugar a lot. Protein, kind of moderate, somewhere in the middle. Fat, no impact on our blood sugar. So with that information in mind, we're just reverse engineering it. We're going to choose foods, fill up on foods that spike our blood sugar the least. So the high protein, high fat, the lower carbohydrates, which there are plenty of foods available to you. Before I forget, I should have said this at the beginning, but please, if you're just joining us, make sure that you go back and watch the day 1 and day 2 replays. Each day of the challenge is kind of building upon itself. And so I wrote these trainings, I created these trainings really to build on each other. And what you learned, for example, on day 2 is going to increase your understanding of what I'm teaching you today. And what I teach you today is going to increase your understanding of what I teach you tomorrow. So at the top of our 5-day challenge Facebook group, all the replays can be found underneath the featured tab. I also send them out via email later in the day, but please find the replays at the top of the featured tab. Okay. Yeah, I see you guys asking questions about high fat and keto. Guys, this isn't a keto program. We don't actually quantify fat intake. And to be honest, it doesn't need to be high fat. You just need some fat. We should certainly not be eating low fat. Keto is high fat, moderate protein, low carb. All I'm teaching is watch your carbs, really, and don't shy away from natural fats and protein. Okay, this is not a calorie problem. This is an insulin problem. Okay, so we learned yesterday the example of eating a low fat, high carbohydrate meal that's equal in calories to a low carb, high protein meal, for example. 2 totally different impacts on your blood sugar, right? So it has nothing to do with calories. You take 2 meals that have the same amount of calories, right? You can sit down for one meal that's 500 calories and sit down the next day for a completely different meal that's also 500 calories and get 2 wildly different blood sugar readings, right? One meal might spike you 5 points. The other meal might spike you 105 points, right? So this is not like this whole diabetes and blood sugar thing has nothing to do with calories, and everything to do with insulin. So let's talk about what insulin is. Here's just some basic information you need to have. Insulin is a fat storage hormone produced by the pancreas. Okay, it has a lot of roles in the body, but one thing insulin does is it's really good at manufacturing fat. So it's a fat storage hormone, and it's produced by the pancreas. So you don't have to be on insulin injections to harness the power of insulin, or to experience the detriments of insulin. You don't have to be on insulin injections. We're all producing insulin, okay? Insulin is your body's only way to lower your blood sugar. So what that means is anytime your blood sugar is high, insulin is also high. Okay? Anytime your blood sugar is high, insulin is also high, because the only way There's really only two ways we can lower our blood sugar. When our blood sugar is high, we rely on insulin to take sugar out of the bloodstream and pack it away, right? Or we can move our bodies. We can burn off that sugar. So that could look like exercise. It could also just look like going for a walk, dancing in the kitchen, doing some dishes, like movement. We can burn off some of that sugar, but those are the only two ways. So the only innate way that our body has is insulin. We're relying on insulin to lower our blood sugar. Third bullet, super important here. People with type 2 diabetes produce plenty of insulin. It is a myth to say that you don't have enough insulin. Lack of insulin is absolutely not the problem here. And how many of you guys, type me, how many of you guys were under the impression that having type 2 diabetes means that you don't make enough insulin? This is very, very, very common misconception about type 2 diabetes. So people with type 2 diabetes, if you actually went and got your insulin levels tested, you would see that your insulin levels are incredibly high, not low. Nobody's doing this. I'm seeing lots of you type me in the chat. Nobody's testing their insulin levels. But if you did, and I would love if you would, but you might have to pay out of pocket because your doctor's probably going to tell you that insurance won't cover it. I don't think it's an expensive test, but if you were to get your fasting insulin levels tested, guess what? If you've really got type 2 diabetes and you were not misdiagnosed, your insulin levels are incredibly high. I see only one person saying that she was told this. Right. And so it's a misconception. And what that what high insulin levels is called is hyperinsulinemia. Hyper being high, hyperinsulinemia. It's like the telltale sign that we're dealing with insulin resistance, i.e. type 2 diabetes. I want to be really clear that type 1 diabetes is totally different. Type 1 diabetes is a completely different diagnosis where someone's pancreas literally doesn't produce enough insulin. So they have to take insulin injections. And there's absolutely no shame in that. That's a perfect example of where Western medicine can be life-saving. Someone with type 1 diabetes or 1.5 does require insulin therapy. But those of you, which is the vast majority of everybody here right now, you really have type 2 diabetes and you produce plenty of insulin. In fact, you have so much insulin that you're developing a resistance to it. That's the problem. So I keep throwing around this term insulin resistance, and a lot of people have heard that term. You guys are probably familiar with this term, but what does that actually mean? So what does it mean that you have high insulin levels, but you're just resistant to the insulin? So here's what it means. Here's, at least in my words, what it means. It's when your body becomes desensitized to the effects of insulin, right? So your body's kind of numbed out to it. So you're desensitized to the effects of insulin, meaning that you need more than the normal amount of insulin to keep your blood sugar in range. So this is obviously a big problem because remember, insulin's the only way we can lower our blood sugar. Aside from like going out and exerting ourselves and burning off that sugar, there's only one other way. It's insulin. So insulin is the only way we can lower our blood sugar, but if you are becoming resistant to it and you need more and more and more than what's considered normal to keep your blood sugar in range, then this is a big problem. So the insulin, yeah, Michelle says, so the insulin isn't doing its job. Yeah, it's not doing its job because you become resistant to it. So I'm going to keep diving in. I'm going to share a really helpful analogy with you guys today so that everybody can kind of wrap their head around this and really understand what's happening and why we develop insulin resistance to begin with, because there's a lot of theories floating around out there. But a lot of these are truly just theories, not rooted in good science. So I'm going to keep talking a little bit and then I'll share that analogy with you guys. But just know that when you have insulin resistance, it means that you need more than the normal amount of insulin to keep your blood sugar in range. So if you guys were to go and get a fasting insulin test, you would see that your insulin levels are really, really high. So that tells us right there, that's factual information, that your pancreas is producing plenty of insulin. There's nothing wrong with your pancreas, right? In fact, it might be a little tired because it's trying so hard to keep up, pumping out more and more insulin over the years as you become more and more resistant. But it's not like type 1. And it's very frustrating to see so many doctors and so much of Western medicine's treatment of type 2 diabetes treating it as if it's type 1, prescribing insulin injections to people with type 2 diabetes who already have high insulin levels. And and here's the other thing, and we're going to talk about this, but insulin is also chronically high insulin is also damaging to almost every system of the body. And so we're throwing gasoline on the fire the way that we treat type 2 diabetes in the United States with Western medicine. We're throwing gasoline on the fire. We're increasing insulin levels more and more. And this is why we don't see people coming off of medications very often. This is why we don't see people reversing diabetes, type 2 diabetes very often. We're treating it wrong. We're treating it like it's type 1, completely different animal. So now we need to talk about the difference or the opposite of insulin resistance. So the opposite of being resistant to insulin is being sensitive to it. And that's the goal. So the opposite of insulin resistance is insulin sensitivity. And I always like to ask, how many of you guys here have actually heard of insulin sensitivity? Type yes if you have, type no if you have never heard of insulin sensitivity. Because what I find is that everybody's talking about insulin resistance, but nobody's talking about insulin sensitivity, which is when I say there's only one solution to type 2 diabetes, this is it. Insulin sensitivity is it. So I'm not lying. That's a fact. I'm not lying when I say that there is only one solution to type 2 diabetes. And people on the internet attack me over this statement because they go, everybody says they have the solution. I'm like, well, this is it. It's insulin sensitivity. It's the opposite, right? That's all you do. You reverse the insulin resistance, which is reversible, and you become insulin sensitive. Yeah, I'm seeing mostly no's. The vast majority of you guys have never heard of insulin sensitivity, right? So this is a term that by the end of this 5-day challenge, I always love hearing from you guys when we say, what are your goals on day 5? We talk about your goals and everyone goes, my goal is to be insulin sensitive. And I'm like, I love that. You guys are such good students. That is absolutely the goal, is to become insulin sensitive. And this is repairable. The insulin resistance is repairable. Also, I like to think of insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity on a spectrum. It's not black or white. You're not like either insulin resistant or insulin sensitive, right? It's not black or white. You fall somewhere on the spectrum. So I hope that also makes sense. It's really helpful to think of it that way. So you might be, some of you guys here on that spectrum are incredibly insulin resistant. That's those of you who have been dealing with this for 20, 30 years. Your A1C is like 12.5 or higher. You're severely insulin resistant at this point. And then there's those of you who are just a little insulin resistant. Maybe you were just diagnosed with pre-diabetes, and you're somewhere kind of in the middle, right? And everybody, I promise you guys, everybody can move towards the insulin sensitive side of the spectrum. It's a marathon, not a race, but we can make really good progress with what we're teaching you this week. And it really doesn't take as long as you would think. Again, you're making progress. It's not black or white. You're not going to be insulin sensitive, reverse your diabetes, off medications overnight, but you can make very good progress in a pretty darn short amount of time. So yeah, Beth is sharing that her insulin levels through the roof. I was told many years ago, 15 years ago, that I had insulin resistance, but my doctor didn't tell me how to fix it, and still no doctor can tell me how to bring it down. Yeah, guess what? We're reverse engineering it. Like that's exactly what I've done for the type 2 community is I've reverse engineered it. I know, and I'm teaching you guys this week, I know exactly which foods and which lifestyle factors increase our blood sugar and therefore increase our insulin levels the most. And so all we do is we reverse engineer it and we go, okay, what foods raise our blood sugar and therefore our insulin levels the least? And we focus on those. And then we can talk about lifestyle factors as well that raise our blood sugar and insulin levels. Anything that raises your blood sugar raises your insulin, guys. That's the thing. So we can focus on blood sugar. We can't see our insulin levels, right? We can't see our insulin levels unless you go to a lab and you get your insulin drawn and it's just that snapshot in time. But on a daily basis, we can see our blood sugar. And we know that when our blood sugar's high, insulin follows because insulin's job is to get that sugar out of the blood and lower it, right? So let's talk about what causes insulin resistance. I basically already said it. Thank you guys. for all the kind words rolling in. What causes the insulin resistance? The answer is high insulin. Okay. So it's the chronically high insulin levels that cause us to develop a resistance to it. And this is where I'll kind of give us an analogy. So I'm going to leave this screen up and then I'm going to share an analogy. Let me see what I have next. Okay. So persistently high insulin levels fuels insulin resistance, okay? And persistently low insulin levels, which is what we're teaching you to do, is how you reverse it. So I'm going to give you guys that analogy I keep promising. I'm going to probably talk for quite a few minutes about this, but people tend to like this analogy. So our body builds up a resistance to all sorts of things. Our bodies are very, very smart. Another example, so we build up a resistance to insulin to keep us safe. And we also build up a resistance to other things. So alcohol and any substance, pretty much any substance, drugs as well. But let's talk about alcohol because it's something a lot of people have experienced firsthand. When someone drinks often, they develop a resistance to alcohol. We usually call it a tolerance. We'll say, oh, I have a high tolerance for alcohol. I've been drinking a lot lately, so I've built up my tolerance and I can drink quite a bit, right? Because I've built up that tolerance. I'm drinking often. But really, what that tolerance is it's a resistance. The body has developed a resistance to the alcohol. So it takes more alcohol to have the same effect. So the same kind of thing is happening in people with insulin. As your insulin levels are high over time, consistently high, your body starts to develop a resistance to it, so where it loses its effectiveness. So now you require more insulin to have the same blood sugar lowering effect. Just like someone who drinks alcohol often needs more alcohol to get that buzz, right? So I'll make this even more maybe relatable. Let's take two individuals, okay? Um, and let's say one of them drinks every single day. Okay. He comes home, he cracks open a beer, and he starts drinking until bedtime, right? And he might drink 8 beers after work. He has a strong tolerance or a strong resistance to alcohol. If you go back and look at the history of this guy, he wasn't born with that tolerance, right? He developed it. He probably started with 3 beers, 2 beers, 3 beers. Okay, used to get a buzz off 2 or 3, then stopped getting a buzz off of 2 or 3. So now it takes 5 beers. And then a few months later, okay, now he needs 8 beers to have the same effect. So as he consistently has a high alcohol intake, he develops a stronger and stronger resistance to it. So it takes more alcohol for him to get that buzz. Okay. So hopefully this is making sense so far. Now let's look at the opposite person. Let's take someone who never drinks alcohol, right? Maybe they only drink a couple times a year, like holidays and special occasions, right? So you take this other person and you take them to a party and they're like, okay, I'm letting loose. It's Christmas. It's Christmas Eve. I'm at a cocktail party. Like, I'm going to have a drink. They have one cocktail and they get that buzz, right? They have no tolerance. They have no resistance to the alcohol. They're very sensitive to it, right? Remember, the opposite of resistance is sensitivity. So one person is highly resistant to the alcohol. The other person is highly sensitive to the alcohol. And what's the difference between these two people? One of them consistently has a high intake of alcohol that's numbing their body out and building up this resistance. And the other person is highly sensitive to it because they keep their alcohol intake so low. So same thing can be said for insulin. If you're someone whose diet and lifestyle is such that your insulin levels are always high, right? And we're going to talk more about what increases your insulin levels. So bear with me here. But if you're someone who has consistently high insulin levels for any reason at all, you're going to develop a resistance to it, okay? And conversely, if you're someone who consistently keeps your insulin levels low, then you're also going to be very sensitive to it, okay? And it's a spectrum, right? So the person that's drinking the alcohol every single day, and it's reversible, okay? So the person who's drinking alcohol every single day, 7 days a week, you know, and then they go, and then if what, I'm stuttering, if this person were to get sober, okay, if they go, okay, I have to stop drinking, I'm going to stop drinking for 3 months. What do you think is going to happen next time they want to throw back some beers or have a few cocktails 3 months after being sober? What's going to happen, guys? I know you already know. Yeah, you guys are saying this makes sense. I'm glad. There's always a little bit of a lag in the comments that come through. Yes, Nevelyn, now they're sensitive. Yep, they're wasted, Tina says. Yeah, they're going to get drunk. Their sensitivity comes roaring back. Exactly. They'll be sensitive to alcohol's effect again. Mike, it depends. Yeah, it does depend, right? What's their level of insulin sensitivity or alcohol sensitivity at that point, right? But like, I mean, I think most of us have probably been there where maybe you're at a season in your life where you're drinking more and you kind of build up a little bit of that tolerance to where like, oh, okay, like one martini used to get me a great buzz and then now two martinis I'd be like wasted. And then if you continue drinking at that rate, then two martinis you're going to barely feel any effects, right? Over time, and then you need three. And I'm not, yeah, to be clear, I'm not talking about like alcoholism. I'm just using this as an example of resistance versus sensitivity and how our body creates that and how it's a spectrum and it's reversible. And you can take someone who is very resistant or has a high tolerance for alcohol, and it's caused by the chronically high, consistently high alcohol intake. That's what causes them to develop the resistance, right? And so we remove the chronically high intake and then they become sensitive again, right? But also, there's almost no end to how resistant a person can be, right? I mean, we could, instead of beer, we could say it's vodka, right? We could say, okay, he used to have 3 cocktails a night. Then he started having 5, and now he's not any longer feeling the effects of 5 shots of vodka. So now he's doing 7 shots of vodka. And then eventually, 7 shots of vodka doesn't do the job, doesn't have an effect on him. So he's built up a resistance to 7 now. Now he needs 9. Then that loses its effect. He needs 11, right? It's like it goes on and on and on. And the same thing can be said of insulin resistance, where initially you're insulin sensitive, you develop a little bit of a resistance, and if this is left unchecked, right? If your insulin levels remain high and are left unchecked, you develop a resistance to the next level of insulin and the next level of insulin. So, the way that we treat type 2 diabetes in the United States, the way that Western medicine is treating type 2 diabetes is like throwing gasoline on the fire. It is akin to a person going to their doctor and saying, "Hey, doc, 7 shots of vodka isn't doing it for me anymore. I'm not feeling any effect from that. What do I do?" And the doctor, instead of saying, "Hey, let's cut back drastically," and then I bet you if you do that for a while, 7 shots, you're going to be real drunk. You're going to definitely feel the effects, right? Instead of doing that, the doctor says, "Oh, let's go ahead and try 9. That'll do it. You should feel the effects at 9." Guy goes back in 3 months later. Hey, 9 worked at first, but now 9's not working either. What do I do? Oh, bump it up. Let's try 11. Let's try 11 shots. Then you'll probably feel it, right? Do you guys get where I'm going with this? So this is exactly what's happening the way we're treating type 2 diabetes and insulin resistant. Is we're showing up to the doctor and saying my blood sugar's high. Doctor goes, "Okay, here's a medicine that's going to increase." They don't tell you this, but here's a medicine. If you actually look up how it works, it increases your insulin levels even more. What does that do? It brings your blood sugar and A1C down. First few months, you're like, "Awesome, this new medication's really working." So you go, "Okay, great. The medication's working. My blood sugar dropped 30, 40, 50 points, whatever it is. My A1C came roaring down. Awesome." What happens over time? You develop a resistance to that level of insulin because the root cause was never addressed. You never did anything to get your insulin levels down. In fact, the doctor prescribed something that made your insulin levels even higher. Did it work at first? Yes, it worked just like the guy going from 6 cocktails to 8 cocktails. It works at first, right? It works for a while. He got the buzz by increasing his alcohol intake, right? But then he developed a resistance to that amount, and what was the option? To increase it even more. So this is literally, you guys, this is literally the hamster, is it the hamster wheel that everybody's on? It's like it feels so promising. You start a new medication, you see your numbers come down, like awesome, right? Except no, because then 3 or 6 months later, what happens? We see it all the time. You go back in, oh, your A1C, it went down at first, but now it's starting to climb again. What do they do? Offer more medication. That's not the solution. That's like, again, it's throwing gasoline on the fire. It's like telling the guy, try 2 more cocktails. That'll do the job. Try increasing your insulin. That'll do the job, right? So the solution is not to increase your insulin levels even more, like what most of these medications are doing. It's to actually get your insulin levels down so you become sensitive to insulin's effects again. Just like the guy, he could, he's faced with 2 options if he wants to get that buzz again. He could do the short term option, which is he can increase his alcohol intake even more. Not a good option, right? Or he can remove the alcohol, become sensitive to it again, and at that point when he's sensitive to it again, then maybe 3 cocktails he'll feel a buzz, right? So we're treating it all wrong, guys. I'm liking that you guys are sharing in the chat that this is making so much sense. Yeah, yeah, this is making so much sense. And yeah, you guys are gonna like the rest of our discussion today and tomorrow. It's gonna be really good. I'll get off my soapbox about the analogy I was sharing between resistance and sensitivity, and alcohol versus insulin resistance, right? But let's talk about, so now you guys should be wondering, okay, so if high insulin is causing this problem, then what causes the high insulin levels, right? So the answer is that anything that increases your blood sugar will increase your insulin levels, okay? Insulin always follows blood sugar. So here are the top things that can raise your blood sugar and will therefore raise your insulin levels. Okay, food. Okay, we talked about that in day 2, food. And when we really look at the breakdown of the 3 macronutrients, you guys learned yesterday that carbohydrates by far have the strongest impact on our blood sugar and therefore are the strongest impact on our insulin levels. So food, especially carbohydrates, is probably the #1 culprit. The cool thing about food is that it's the most within our control. Okay, this is the factor that's most in our control. The next bullet that can raise our insulin levels are certain medications. So specifically, I'll name a couple. Specifically, steroid medications. If you've ever been put on like prednisone or some kind of a steroid medication, if you check your blood sugar, you would know those really spike your blood sugar. I mean, you could be someone with even normal blood sugar and no history of diabetes and start something like prednisone, and guess what happens? Your blood sugar shoots up to 300. So certain medications can have a very strong impact on our blood sugar and insulin. So steroid medications, and then certain chemotherapy drugs too, and probably others that I'm not even aware of, but it's just something to keep in mind and to know. That is by no means me saying to avoid these medications. They can be life-saving when you need them, but it's information to have, right? If you are prescribed something, just expect if you have to take a steroid medication that your blood sugars are going to rise temporarily while that medication is in your system. And I see you guys sharing in the chat your experiences with this. And then stress is another factor. And so when I say stress, this can mean so many different things, right? It can be lack of sleep is an actual physical stress on the body. So if you're sleep deprived, if you're short sleeping, then that's going to have a definite impact on your blood sugar and therefore your insulin levels. Illness and infection of any sort, as well as pain. So illness and infection. I always like to give a couple examples, but I've had clients who like will suddenly get an infection of some sort, whether it's a UTI, right? That's an infection, a urinary tract infection. I've had a client get cellulitis. That's an infection in the skin. And when these things happen, their blood sugar shoots up pretty significantly sometimes. So just know that when your body's fighting something off, or you get an infection, or you feel unwell, or you're in pain, that's another one. Like that's a stress on the body. Like any of these things can raise your blood sugar. Okay. So, people who are in chronic pain, for example, like imagine what that's doing to their blood sugar and insulin levels. It's causing them to develop a stronger insulin resistance. That's why I'm saying food is most the factor that's within the most of our control. We can control the way that we eat, and eating in a way that doesn't spike our blood sugar and A1C. But we can't always control if we need a certain medication, right? We can't always control our stress as well. It's a lot harder to control that. But yes, illness and infection. I like to give the example of my client Pat. At one point, she wears a CGM, so she can always see her blood sugar, and her blood sugar was doing so well. It was like in the low 100s, hanging out all the time. And then all of a sudden one day she goes, I don't get it, but my blood sugar shot up to it was like 250, like it shot up significantly. She was at work and she's just like, I don't know what's going on. So she didn't have any symptoms of any infection yet, right? But what happened was the next morning she woke up and her whole ankle was swollen, and it was cellulitis. So what happened was the infection was already existing in her body the day before, and it caused her blood sugar to spike, right? But she didn't know it. She was walking around with no symptoms. And then when she woke up the next morning, her ankle blew up and she goes, oh, that explains my high blood sugar. So just think sometimes there's going to be weeks where maybe your blood sugar's been consistently doing really well. And then one week you're like, oh my gosh, my blood sugar's 30 points higher this whole week consistently. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes I think our body does such a good job of fighting off an infection and nipping it in the bud before we even experience a symptom, that sometimes we just have to write it off. Like maybe I'm sleep deprived, maybe my body's fighting something off and I'm just not experiencing any symptoms. Like there's so many factors. And then of course there's emotional stress. And I think that's what most people think of when they hear the word stress. But when I say stress, I'm talking about both physical and emotional. Physical stress being sleep deprivation, physical stress being pain, an infection, something like that. Emotional stress being you've got work deadlines, you're having an argument with someone, you're having marital issues, financial issues. Like all of these emotional stressors can also wreak havoc on our blood sugar and our insulin. I didn't put exercise on this list, but I saw somebody in the comments say that exercise raises their blood sugar. I actually will say I agree, it does, especially in my experience, more intense exercise, like more rigorous exercise, you will see a temporary rise in your blood sugar, and then it'll come back down. Again, if you wear a CGM, you see this. So yesterday, I hopped on the spin bike, the Peloton, for 20 minutes. And I actually forgot to check my blood sugar before, like as I was riding. But when I got off, I looked at the graph and I saw it. My blood sugar was here all afternoon. And then during my ride, it went up quite a bit. I mean, probably 20, 30 points. It went up. And then after I cooled down and took a shower and whatnot, it came back down. So I would say exercise falls under the category of stress. This is our body's fight or flight nervous system. I want to be clear that I'm not saying don't avoid exercise. This is a net positive thing to do for yourself, right? It's doing more good than harm for sure. But just know that when you're exercising really vigorously, your blood sugar rises. That's our body's fight or flight nervous system. Really, in historically, the human species, when we are running or sprinting or doing something like that, it's because we are in a fight or flight situation, right? But nowadays we have to kind of try to mimic that in our modern day environment. And so sometimes we hop on a spin bike and there is no, there's no saber-toothed tiger chasing me, but my body's going to respond as if there is, right? And so we have to kind of mimic that, and it's beneficial overall. But then those are situations where you can see your blood sugar rise. Mm-hmm. And Greg sharing that his blood sugar will rise 20 to 25 points when he takes a hot shower. And a lot of people are seeing their blood sugar rise right now just because it's summertime. If you live somewhere hot, especially like hot and humid where you're really uncomfortable, that's another example, guys, of a stress on the body, right? Anything that makes you like gives you discomfort, like being hot, is going to raise your blood sugar, right? That's a stress on the body. So now I want you guys to kind of stop and think, and you're not going to be able to come up with a very clear answer for this, but again, coming back to thinking of insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance on a spectrum, okay? It's not black or white. It's not a yes or no question. You're not either or. You fall somewhere on the spectrum. And no matter where you fall on the spectrum, we can work towards the goal, which is the insulin sensitive side of the spectrum, okay? So it doesn't matter if you are way over here on the insulin resistant side. That would be someone whose A1C is really, really high, or they've been dealing with this for a really, really long time. Or like another telltale sign that you're super insulin resistant is that you're on insulin therapy, you're on insulin injections, and like you need a lot of insulin, right? It never starts that way. By the way, anyone here who takes insulin injections, anyone here who's on insulin injections knows that they need more now than they did when they started, right? They didn't start at 50 units a day or 50 units a meal. They started at 3 units a meal, 5 units a meal, right? And then they developed a resistance to that amount. And so they had to increase it. Okay, now you need 10 units per meal. Oh, now you need 15 units per meal. Till finally they're at 140 units of insulin a day. This happens all the time, right? It's because they're becoming more insulin resistant as they keep increasing their insulin levels. And then if we remove the exposure to all this insulin and we get insulin levels down, then yeah, we can reverse the resistance to it. So your homework assignment for today, you guys, I really like, this is a very eye-opening one, is to Google your medications. And what we're looking for specifically is we're looking to learn whether or not your medications are increasing your insulin levels in your body. So are your medications stimulating more insulin? In other words, are they throwing gasoline on the fire and contributing to your insulin resistance? So I'll tell you right now, if you're on insulin injections, the answer is a hard yes. Insulin injections are definitely causing you to become very much more insulin resistant. And then there's too many diabetes medications out there to count, right? And they're coming out with more every day. So type it in Google. Don't start with the manufacturer's description, because the manufacturers, to be clear, we're not looking for the generic description that says, you know, Jardiance works by helping people with diabetes lower their blood sugar and A1C. That's generic. We're actually looking for like what is going on physiologically in your body. How is it lowering your blood sugar and A1C? So type, how does this work? What is the mechanism of action? If you're not on medications, you're going to skip this assignment. And this is relevant regardless, guys. Like I said, it doesn't matter if the insulin is coming from an injection or your pancreas. It doesn't matter if the insulin is being stimulated from a medication or it's being stimulated because you're eating the wrong foods, right? I mean, our pancreas is going to pump out insulin anytime our blood sugar's high. So if you're eating the wrong foods, it's raising your blood sugar and raising your insulin. If you're chronically stressed or undergoing an infection, it's raising your blood sugar and raising your insulin. If you're taking glipizide, it's raising your insulin. It's telling your pancreas to pump out more. So a lot of these medications work by telling your pancreas to pump out and produce more insulin. So that's your homework for today. Aside from, we're going to also do a before and after blood sugar test with one meal today, just like we did yesterday, following the same guidelines. So there's 2 micro assignments today, and you can just copy and paste what you find into our day 3 post. This is what the day 3 post looks like in our Facebook group. I'm really glad you guys are enjoying this. Thanks, Norma. So the day 3 post looks like this. There's 2 micro assignments today. Google your medications if you're on any. And then tell us in the chat, does it increase your insulin levels or not? And what the description will often say is, blah blah works by stimulating the pancreas to produce more insulin, which lowers blood sugar, right? And then your other assignment is to test your blood sugar just like we did yesterday, following the same guidelines. So again, and this is all posted in the Facebook group, and you'll get an email later today with today's replay and instructions. But basically, find the day 3 post. You're going to test either lunch or dinner. So you're going to test right before your first bite of food, and then again 60 to 90 minutes after your first bite. Somewhere right between 60 and 90 minutes is perfect. And we're looking for the peak. How much did that meal raise your blood sugar? We want to keep it under 30 points. And if you follow the guidelines we shared yesterday, you should be able to keep it under 30 points, no problem. If it's a little bit over and you follow the guidelines, we're going to chalk it up to a meter error. And those of you who see less than a 30-point increase, give yourselves a big pat on the back. You ate a very blood sugar friendly meal. And that's how you're going to get this under control. Get your insulin down and become insulin sensitive, reverse the insulin resistance. So I want to make sure that you guys are all clear on what we're doing. I see that you guys are sharing already. Sonia shares, glipizide stimulates the release of insulin from the pancreas, directing your body to store blood sugar. Exactly. So Sonia, great job. Sonia did exactly what we just asked you to do, which is to Google your medications and found exactly what we were looking for. So now we know, Sonia, that glipizide is stimulating the release of insulin from your pancreas. So you don't have to be on insulin injections to be taking a medication that is like throwing gasoline on the fire. It's increasing your insulin levels. Does it work to bring your blood sugar down? Yeah, at first. And then what's the solution? Oh, 3 or 6 months later, when that amount of glipizide stops working because that amount of insulin stops working, what's the solution? Increase the glipizide or add a second medication. All of this is just increasing your insulin levels and making you more resistant to it. So none of them address. I'm telling you guys, there's not a single pill or injection on the market that actually addresses the root of the problem. But you guys have the power within you to do that. So it's very empowering. Okay, guys, so I think we're clear on what we're doing. You're going to test another meal today. We're here to cheer you on. Callie, Tiana, and I are in the Facebook group supporting you all. And then we'll show up tomorrow, same time, same place. So tomorrow we're going to talk about signs and symptoms of insulin resistance. So now that we understand, what's stimulating insulin, where all this insulin is coming from, tomorrow we're going to talk about all the ways that these high insulin levels are wreaking havoc on your body, because it is so much more impactful than just your blood sugar and A1C. Insulin is really closely tied to high blood pressure, inflammation, weight gain. We're going to talk big time about that tomorrow. The connection between insulin and weight loss resistance, why so many people who have, basically, if your insulin levels are high, it's damn near impossible to lose weight. Okay, because again, insulin is a fat storage hormone. When insulin is high, it's a well-known side effect of insulin injections. People start insulin injections, they gain weight. And end of sentence. That's just the doctors are aware of this. It's a side effect of insulin. I'm so glad this was helpful, Sophie. Yeah, so tomorrow's going to be another really jam-packed day. And I think that today's training is really important to understand what we're going to go over tomorrow. So thank you guys for hanging out with me again today. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. We will be seeing you all in the Facebook group and answering questions and cheering you on in there. And then, yeah, like I said, same time, same place tomorrow. Catch the replays under the featured tab at the top of the Facebook group. And you are going to get an email from me later today with today's replay. So guys, you guys are so sweet. I'm so glad you guys are enjoying. We absolutely love doing this for you all. So we will see you tomorrow, or I will see you tomorrow, and we'll see you in the Facebook group. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.